Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Christian Freeman. I'm a software developer and developer advocate, and I'm super excited to start this new video series today where I'm going to be going through as much of freeCodeCamp as I can. So if you aren't familiar with freeCodeCamp, it is a free coding school online where you can learn to code by building projects. You can even earn certifications on things like responsive web design, JavaScript, algorithms and data structures. Like there's a huge amount of content. And in these videos, I'm basically just going to go through it. We're going to do what I kind of am calling a code through, where I'm going to code through as much of freeCodeCamp as I can and tell you about what you need to know, how these things work. And along the way, I'll also link some study guides and some practice questions from my website. I really think that freeCodeCamp is an awesome program that I've seen. I know a lot of people personally who have gone through it and learned a ton and literally gotten jobs because of it. So really, I think there's no better way to get started in learning programming than freeCodeCamp. So without further ado, let's hop into it. And we're going to start with the responsive web design portion of the course, though as I flesh all of this out, you'll be able to find videos on all the other ones as well. So let's go on the computer and take a look at it. So the responsive web design certification is basically learning the basics of HTML and CSS. So HTML is the hypertext markup language and CSS is cascading style sheets. So you can think of HTML as kind of the what of laying out your websites and CSS as the how. And together they kind of say any website, including this one, the freeCodeCamp one, where the HTML is something, for instance, like this text here or this image here. And then the CSS says, how does that get laid out? So for instance, the CSS here would say that there are these big sort of, gutters on the side that cause the content to be centered here, in the middle of the page. So there are a lot of courses here, and there's 28 of them in this basic HTML and HTML5. And so let's hop into it. So the first thing you need to know is that for each of these lessons, there are basically 3 or I guess 4 sections. So the first is sort of the challenge itself, kind of the content of the lesson. The second here is your code. So this is going to be where you'll write HTML code. The third here is a preview. So this is like what it looks like live. And then if you have test output of some kind, it will go here in this 4th gutter. You can also come down here, you can run tests. So you can see that the test output should come here. And I'm getting this kind of test that says, well, I haven't quite figured it out yet. Let's get to that in a second. And then we have the option of resetting our code back to, if we really get in a crazy place, we need to reset everything back to scratch. We'll click that button there. The first challenge here, say hello to HTML elements. So I'm going to kind of skim these as I go through them, unless it's something really detailed, because I assume you're going to be coding through it with me. You can come back and read the output here, or you can kind of pause the video too and read if you want it that way. Okay, so do you see the code in your code editor that says h1 hello, and then the closing tag h1? That's an HTML element. So most HTML elements have an opening tag and a closing tag. Opening tags look like this. So you have this left bracket, h1 right bracket, and closing tags look like this, where you have that same left bracket and then a / h1 close right bracket. And so the difference here is, opening, where we say this is the beginning of the h1 tag. Any of the content in here says what that tag is. You'll learn there are a number of them. And then closing tag is the same, but with this / that says this is the end of that tag. So to pass the test on this challenge, change your h1 elements text to hello world. So we have our h1 tag here. It just says hello. And you can see that's the beginning of the tag right here. That's the end of the tag. It just says hello. So how do we change it to say hello world? Well, we'll come in here and we'll add a space and we'll just say hello world. So let's run the test. And we passed our first freeCodeCamp challenge. So headline with the h2 element. So over the next few lessons, we'll build an HTML5 cat photo web app piece by piece. The h2 element you'll be adding in this step will add a level 2 heading to the web page. So the gist of this lesson is that H1 is kind of the introductory tag that you learn, and this stands for basically heading level 1. So there are a number of these, as they mentioned. There is H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. These are different levels of subheading, and normally they'll get formatted kind of with larger text. So you have your headline, which is H1, your subheadline, which is H2, all the way down to H6. So the challenge here is to add an H2 tag that says cat photo app to create a second HTML element below your hello world H1 element. And now we're starting to get some hints here, right? These are our tests that are going to be run. So you should create an H2 element. Your H2 element should have a closing tag. Your H2 element should have the text cat photo app. And then 2 related to the H1, which says your H1 element should have the text hello world, and your H1 element should be before your H2 element. So let's take a look here in the editor. We have our H1 hello world from the past example. And now what we need to do is make an H2 element. So what I'm going to do is make a new line. So we want it to be below our H1 element, right? And I'm going to say H2. So I'm opening that H2 tag. And now I need to give it the text. Well, what is the text? It's this cat photo app right here. So I'll paste that in. And now what do we need to do? Well, we have opened this tag, we've put content inside of it, and now we need to close it, much like this H1 tag is closed here. So I'll just say H2 with that / to close the tag, right? Let's run our tests, and you can see that this one is completed as well. So we're 2 lessons in. Inform with the paragraph element. P elements are the preferred element for paragraph text on websites. P is short for paragraph. You can create a paragraph element like this. We have another P tag here, and inside of that we can put text, like I'm a P tag, and then close that with the closing P tag. So create a P element below your H2 element and give it the text hello paragraph. As I can mention, all HTML tags are written in lowercase, for example, lowercase p, and not capital P, capital P. So that's a useful thing to know. So how do we do this? Well, we're just adding another element here, right? So what we're gonna do is make another new line underneath our H2, and I'm gonna say P. And then what we wanna do is put some text there, right? So what is the text? Well, it's going to be hello paragraph. So I'll copy that, paste it in, and then I'll close that paragraph tag. So now we have 3 elements here, each of them, the H1, the H2, and the paragraph tag all have an associated close tag here. So real quick, what happens if I do this on a new line? So you can see it's actually formatted it. There's this open tag, hello paragraph, and then 4 is a blank line and 5 is empty. So you can see, and 5 is a closing tag, it's not empty. But you can see that things still look the same. I can actually come in here and I can put this however I want. So it's important to note that for many of these elements, you can basically create a new line here, and you can format it in this way. So let's say, like, if I had a paragraph tag that was really, really, really long, right? Maybe what I want to do is actually format it like that, so it's a little bit easier to read, right? You can see what's happening is it's actually making these like spaces, and it's not actually making new paragraphs here. So you can format these on multiple lines. You just need to look at in the editor how it formats and make sure that it's like you'd expect. So that's just a little note there. For now, I'm just going to put this into one line again. Let's run the tests, and we're completed with this challenge. Fill in the blank with placeholder text. So web developers traditionally use lorem ipsum text as placeholder text. So this is basically random text that you can use as placeholders inside of your content. So let's replace the text inside your P element with the first few words of this kitty ipsum text. So let's just grab maybe everything up to there. So before that comma. Now how do we replace hello paragraph with that? Well, we just highlight this content here, importantly not touching the opening and closing tags, and we just paste that in there. So let's run the test. Another easy one, right? Okay, Uncomment HTML. So commenting is a way that you can leave comments for other developers within your code without affecting the resulting output that is displayed to the end user. Commenting is also a convenient way to make code inactive without having to delete it entirely. Comments in HTML start with this left bracket, exclamation point, dash, dash, and end with dash, dash, right bracket. So let's look at this and what it looks like here. So we have our opening comment tag, and then you can see everything in between here gets highlighted in this different syntax color, right? This is indicating that this is commented out. Okay, and then at the end here, we have dash, dash, right bracket, so that is the end of this comment. What happens if I put something right here, right? So maybe pause this, pause the video for a second, think about it, right? So all of this has been commented out. We're underneath where the end of this comment is. So what happens if I put, for instance, H1 hello world? Well, you can see here, it actually renders it out to the screen, right? So all of this code is commented out. It's not being rendered or not being put onto this preview section over here, but anything after that comment does. That's how comments work. They can both be used to leave notes for yourself. So you can say, hey, you know, this is code I was working on. It's not being used right now, whatever. But it can also be used, like it says in the lesson here, to make code inactive or to hide it. In this challenge, what we need to do is we need to remove these comments. So if I delete this line here, and then I also delete this line at the bottom, which you can see if I leave that in here, it actually renders it out, right? HTML doesn't recognize it as the end part of a comment because there was no beginning part of the comment anymore. So let's delete that as well. And now you can see that our code shows up. If we want to re-comment that, we can say left bracket, exclamation point, dash, dash, and then we can close that comment here as well. It disappears again. So let's submit this with the comments removed, and you can see that we passed this challenge. We're already 18% done too, which is awesome. So comment out HTML. So this is basically what we just did, right? We have our comment here. It starts here, it ends here. And what we need to do is comment out our H1 and our P elements, but not your H2 element. So let's delete the comments here and let's start kind of from the beginning. So we want to comment out our H1 and our P element, but not our H2. So let's start a comment here before H1. So it'll just be left bracket, exclamation point, dash, dash. And now we need to comment, or we need to close this comment. So take a sec to think about where you think this should go. So we want to comment out H1 and P element, but not your H2 element. Okay, so we know we have our H1 commented out, and now our next thing is our H2 element. So do we want to comment out our H2 element? No, we don't, right? So what we need to do is actually close the comment right here to hide our H1 element. Now our H2 element, we know we don't want to comment that, so let's skip it, but we do want to comment out our P element, right? So again, we'll make a new comment here, and then we'll come down here and we'll close that. So you can see now we're just seeing our H2 element. One thing you'll see people do a lot with HTML, or really any code in general, is that they will kind of space it out so it's easier to read. There's no spaces here, right? So it looks like just kind of one big block of HTML code basically. So what I'm going to do here, just to show you how it could be nicer to look at, is just insert new lines after, ending a comment or after an element. So you can see our H1 is this little section here, our H2 is a little section, and then our paragraph is its own little chunk down there. Makes it a little bit easier to read, to understand where tags end, where other content begins. It just makes it a little bit easier to read through, especially when there's a lot of this code. So we're now 21% complete. Let's move into the next challenge. So our phone doesn't have much vertical space. This is delete HTML elements. Let's remove the unnecessary elements so we can start building our cat photo app. So delete your H1 element so we can simplify our view. So we have H1, H2, and paragraph. Well, how do we delete our H1 hello world? So you might think that we can just do this. We can delete the content here, and you can see it actually is empty, but that's not quite right because our code is still here. So this H1 element still exists, it's just blank. So instead of doing that, we're just gonna grab this entire line and we're gonna delete it. And I'll just delete those extra lines there at the top. So now we just have our H2 and our paragraph. Run the tests and we get complete on that one. Okay, here's a big one. Introduction to HTML5 elements. So HTML5 introduces more descriptive HTML tags. These include main, header, footer, nav, video, article, section, and others. So HTML is it's existed for a long time. It's had multiple versions over the years since, the 90s basically, that have added more elements, that have made things easier to work with, and have had actual benefits to how we lay out applications on the web. And so some of these have accessibility improvements. They have what freeCodeCamp talks about here, which is SEO improvements, which is search engine optimization. This is basically for Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo or any search engine that you use. Search engine optimization makes your website perform and work better with those search engines. And so there's a bunch of these elements here that I'm sure we'll cover in greater detail as we go through this course. So a main element can have two child elements nested inside of it. So this is the main tag here. It says it helps search engines and other developers find the main content of your page. So you can see here what we do is we open this main tag, and then inside of it we actually have an H1 and a paragraph. So in the past we've basically taken something like this text and put it inside of our H2 tag. But we can, instead of just putting text or something like that, we can also nest other HTML tags inside of our content. And you can see it also gets what we call indented here, that kind of shows you kind of like the flow of your code, right? So you can say we have our main tag, and inside of that we have H1 and we have a paragraph tag. Okay, so what we want to do here is create a second P element after the existing P element with the following text. So we got this big chunk of text here. I'll just go ahead and copy paste that. Then create a main element and nest the two P elements inside the main element. So I'm going to create a new P element here. I'm just going to paste that text in, and then I'm going to close that paragraph tag. Remember, you're always opening a tag. You want to make sure that you at least are thinking about closing it. Maybe you're not quite ready to close it, but once you are ready, don't forget to close it. That will mess up your HTML code pretty drastically. So really make sure you're always paying attention that whenever you open a tag, you are eventually closing it as well. Now what we want to do is create a main element and nest the two P elements inside of that main element. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to the very top here, and we're going to make a new line, and we're going to say main, and we're going to wrap that into we're going to wrap the paragraphs into this main here, and then underneath that we're going to close that main tag. Okay, and so now what we've said is main starts here and ends here. Anything inside of that is nested inside of that main tag. So last thing we'll do is we'll just indent these lines just a little bit, so that we can tell, the paragraph tags are inside of the main element. One more cool thing you'll notice is that as soon as you start nesting things in the editor, you can actually close this entire thing, and you can confirm that, the main tag starts here on line 3 and it ends on line 7. All of this stuff is inside of that main tag. We'll run our tests and we get a complete. Add images to your website. So you can add images to your website by using the image element and point to a specific image's URL using the source attribute. So an example of this would be image source equals, and then you have this URL here, so freeCatPhotoApp/yourimage.jpg. So it also says, note that image elements are self-closing. We'll get to that in a second. All image elements must also have an alt attribute. The text inside an alt attribute is used for screen readers. That is a tool for people who are vision impaired to use their computers to improve accessibility, and is displayed if the image fails to load. Okay, so there's a lot to break down here. Let's start by looking at this image tag. So we're getting introduced to a new tag. It's called image, IMG, and we're also getting introduced to something called an attribute. So you'll notice this is inside of the tag here, right? So you said image, we have this attribute, which is source, which is equal to, so we're saying, this attribute is called source, and it's equal to this value. So here in quotes, we give it this URL. So this is the image tag, and our source attribute is set to this value. Finally, the other note here is that image elements are self-closing. What does that mean? It means that you don't need to pass any sort of /image closing tag to go along with this tag. You just have this. It doesn't need to be closed, which is, for better or worse, the way the HTML works. That might be a little confusing, but you just have to take my word on it. Image tags don't have to be closed. We also have another attribute, which is called alt. So if you come down here, you can see we have our source attribute still. We also have an additional attribute called alt, which is just set to this text value that says a business cat wearing a necktie. So it says, let's try to add an image to our website. Within the existing main element, insert an image element before the existing p elements. Now set the source attribute so that it points to this URL. We have this URL here. And then finally, don't forget to give your image element an alt attribute with applicable text. Okay, so we're gonna put an image element right here. Maybe I'll do it on line 3. I'm gonna put 2 spaces here so that it's indented to match our paragraph tags. And let's create our image element. So I'm gonna say image source, which is going to be our URL. And that's just gonna be this bit.ly FCC relaxing cat. I'm gonna paste that in there. You can see it already shows up, which is great. And I also need to give it an alt attribute. So I'll say alt equals cat. Let's say a cat relaxing. And then outside of that double quote part there, how do we close this? Well, we know that we just put this right angle bracket here, and we don't importantly need to do this, right? We do not need to close the image tag. It's self-closing, as freeCodeCamp says, so we don't need that. We just put these 2 lines. So we have our image tag, source equals, in this double quotes here, the URL of our image. Just to double check, let's copy that and paste it into our browser. Okay, you can see that it shows up. This is just an image. And then we also give it this alt text, a cat relaxing. So you might be saying, you know, where is this text set? Well, it's not going to show it here, but if the URL is broken, you know, if it points to an image that doesn't exist, or if you're using a screen reader, it'll actually read through here, it'll see this text, and then it'll see an image, and instead of showing that image, right, because if you're visually impaired, you can't see the image, you're just going to see this text, or you're going to get this text read back to you by your screen reader that says a cat relaxing. So let's run those tests, and we get another pass. So link to external pages with anchor elements. You can use the A or anchor element to link to content outside of your web page. So A is anchor. This is for linking on your web page. A elements need a destination web address called an href attribute. They also need anchor text. Here is an example. Okay, so we have our A tag. We have an attribute here, which is called href. So, you know, anchor href equals, then we have this double quote value here, which is freecodecamp.org. So this is basically where our content links to, right? Now inside of that anchor tag, you can see it opens right here, and then it closes here at the bottom. We have some text, and it says this links to freecodecamp.org. Your browser will display the text, this links to freecodecamp.org, as a link that you can click, and that link will take you to the web address, you know, www.freecodecamp.org. So create an A element that links to freecatphotoapp.com and has cat photos as its anchor text. Okay, so in this exercise, it doesn't matter where you put it, but I'll just put it here at the top because it seems like there's kind of some space here for that. So I'll indent with 2 spaces first, and now I need to make our A tag. So I'll open that up. I'm going to give it an attribute, in this case href equals, and then in double quotes, I'm just going to paste in this freecatphotoapp.com. So now I have this link. You can see it actually turned everything here into a link. Why is that? Well, it's because I haven't closed the tag yet. So I'm going to close that, and now I need to give it some text. So I'm going to say cat photos, and now I need to close that anchor tag. Okay, so I close that, and now you can see, so I have this A tag, which opens here and closes here. It has the text cat photos, and it has the href attribute, which is this freecatphotoapp.com. Now, if I come over here, I can see my cat photos. Let's right click that and open in a new tab. And now we get this free cat photo app here, so it's linked to that freecatphotoapp.com. Let's run that test and we get another pass. We're 36% done. Okay, link to internal sections of a page with anchor elements. So anchor elements can be used to create internal links to jump to different sections within a web page. To create an internal link, you assign a link's href attribute to a hash symbol. So that's, the pound sign or like a hashtag, which you've probably seen online before, plus the value of the ID attribute for the element that you want to internally link to, usually further down the page. You then need to add the same ID attribute to the element you are linking to. An ID is an attribute that uniquely describes an element. Okay, so here's an example. We have this A anchor tag, which has an href of pound contacts dash header. And then it has this text contacts, and then the link closes here. And then further down in your HTML page, you have this h2, which has an attribute called ID, which is set to contacts dash header. And so what's happening here is we say, okay, here's our link. We have this hash or hashtag symbol, whatever you want to call it, which says this is an internal link. So that hashtag there means internal link. And then we have the name of, or the ID of what we want it to link to. In this case, contacts dash header. Further down, we have this h2, which has an ID attribute, which is very importantly supposed to exactly match what this what this URL or like internal link is. It's not actually a URL, it's an internal link, right? So contacts dash header, contacts dash header. So when users click the contacts link, they'll be taken to the section of the web page with the contacts header element. Okay, so change your external link to an internal link by changing the href attribute to hash footer, and then the text from cat photos to jump to bottom. So let's find our link here. So this is the one that we made earlier. We'll talk about this target blank in a second. But for now, let's just change this href to pound or hash footer, and then the text from cat photos to jump to bottom. Now it says remove the target blank attribute, that's target equals underscore blank attribute, from the anchor tag, since this causes the linked document to open in a new window tab. So what does that mean? So if we have this link here, it has target set to underscore blank. If I click this, you'll see it actually opens it in a new tab. So the reason for that is that target set to underscore blank is a specific attribute that basically tells HTML, don't open this in the same window, open it in a new tab. Don't really know the history of that, to be honest with you. If someone does know, let me know in the comments. I'm really not sure. It's another one of those conventions that people just use in HTML. I'm not really sure what the history is on that. But in our case, what we want to do is we want to remove this entirely. So we're going to delete it. It's just going to be this href set to pound footer. And then the text here is just jump to bottom. So last thing, add an ID attribute with a value of footer to the footer element at the bottom of the page. Okay, so let's scroll down here. Got a bunch of paragraph tags, and at the very bottom we have this footer. So we need to add an ID attribute here, which is just set to footer. Okay, so what happens when we actually do that? Well, if we come onto our preview section here, you can see this is our footer down here at the bottom. Let's scroll back up and let's click jump to bottom, and you can see that it jumped all the way down to the bottom here and linked to this footer. So again, we've set up an href here with pound footer, which is an ID on the same page. So it's saying give or set up this link to another part of the same page as an internal link is what we call it. And when we click footer, we come down here and match on this ID equals footer. I'll run the tests and we get another pass. Okay, nest an anchor element within a paragraph. So you can nest links within other text elements. We have this paragraph tag here, and then in a new line, we have this big chunk of text that says here's A, and then an A tag here, target blank href freecodecamp.org, and then the text link to freecodecamp.org, close tag for you to follow. Okay, so what's happening here? They're going to break it down here for you, but I'll explain it as well. We have our paragraph tag, right? We've seen that before. That's for making a paragraph of text, kind of like this kitty ipsum one, which is right here. We also have inside of that, here's A, A tag, that's our link or our anchor tag. Here's a link to freecodecamp.org. So that text there is going to be a link inside of the rest of our text, which will just be plain text. So let's come down here. So nest the existing A element within a new P element. The new paragraph should have text that says view more cat photos, where cat photos is a link and the rest is plain text. Okay, so let's make a new paragraph tag here. And I just want to show you real quick something I did without even thinking about it, but I want to show you how it works. Is if you do a new line here and you press tab, it'll automatically indent 2 lines here, 2 spaces that is. So, I can say enter tab, 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 right? I can indent, and then I can press shift tab, or I can press delete to jump back, different indent levels. So let's create a new paragraph element. I'm going to say view more. And then what I want to do here is say view more cat photos, where cat photos is a link and the rest is plain text. So I'll actually indent this like that. And now what I need to say is view more cat photos. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this into a single line like that. View more cat photos. That is the text for that. You can see it matches here. And now all I need to do is close that paragraph text, right? So paragraph starts here, plain text, view more, right? So the requirement here is view more cat photos, where cat photos is a link and the rest is plain text. So view more cat photos, and that's my link. Let's run the test and we get a complete here. Make dead links using the hash symbol. Sometimes you want to add a or anchor or link elements to your website before you know where they will link. This is also handy when you're changing the behavior of a link using JavaScript, which we'll learn about later. Oh boy. The current value of the href attribute is a link that points to https://freecatphotoapp.com. Replace the href attribute with a pound, also known as a hash symbol, to create a dead link. For example, href equals pound. Okay, this is a pretty easy one. So we're going to go find our link here, which links to freecatphotoapp.com. Start here from the top, h2, main paragraph, okay, a tag, freecatphotoapp.com. And now what we want to do is we want to change the href attribute. So we want to replace the value of it with a pound. So we're replacing it where we're saying, this is this other URL that we want you to go to. We're going to replace it with this hash, which importantly doesn't have an ID after it, right? It's just blank basically. And we're calling this a dead link. So if I click it here, nothing happens, though it does open it in a new tab, right? Because we have target blank, but it doesn't go anywhere different. It's just a dead link. Okay, so I'll close that tab. Let's run the test again, and it passes. So turn an image into a link. You can make elements into links by nesting them within an A or anchor element. Nest your image within an A element. Here is an example. So we have this A tag, which opens here. The href attribute is one of those dead links. It's just set to the hash or pound symbol. And inside of that, we have this whole image tag here, right? So we open the A tag, and then we have our image nested inside of that, including the source attribute, including the alt attribute. And then at the end of that, we close it with the closing A tag. So let's turn this image into, or nest it into, a link. So place the existing image within an A anchor element. Once you've done this, hover over your image with your cursor's normal pointer, that's this one right here, you can see my mouse moving, should become the link clicking pointer. The photo is now a link. Okay, so we have our image tag here, right? And to nest it, I'm just gonna make a new line, and I'm gonna say a href equals pound or hash, right? So we're making this an anchor link. Let's close that opening tag. And now I'll indent this because we're inside of the A tag. And then underneath it, I'm just going to close that anchor tag. So I've now wrapped this image tag here with an opening anchor tag and a closing anchor tag. And I've set the href here to just a dead link, which is that hash. So now if I hover over this, you can see that it is a link. If I click it, it doesn't go anywhere because I haven't given it an href value here, right? I've just made this a dead link that doesn't go anywhere, but it is a link. So let's run the test and we'll submit it and we get a pass and we're 50% done. Okay, create a bulleted unordered list. So HTML has a special element for creating unordered lists or bullet point style lists. Unordered lists start with an opening UL or unordered list element followed by any number of LI, which is your list element. And then finally, they close with a /UL. So for example, UL list element milk, open list element here, text goes inside of it, and then a closing list element. And then we have another one here that is cheese. And then we close that unordered list with the /UL. So that would create a bullet point style list of milk and cheese. So the challenge here is remove the last two paragraph elements and create an unordered list of 3 things that cats love at the bottom of the page. Okay, so we're gonna remove these 2 tags. I'm just gonna click them or highlight them and then just delete them. So now what we wanna do is create our unordered list. So let's start by doing the opening unordered list tag. And what I'm actually going to do as well is just make the closing tag here as well. So open unordered list, close tag unordered list. And now inside of that, we need to put a list item. So we'll say LI, and then I'm going to put something that cats love. I'll say milk, and I will close that. And now you can see on the left-hand side here, it is actually given it this little bullet point here, as well as some text. And now I can move on to adding 2 more things. So I'll make another list element here. I'll say catnip, and I'll close that as well. So you can see a second item shows up here. And then I'll make a third one that is just set to fish. So list item opens, text goes inside of here, milk, and then we close that tag with the /li. We do that 3 times here. And then we close our unordered list to say that is the end of our list. So let's run the test and we get another pass. Create an ordered list. So HTML has another special element for creating ordered lists or numbered lists. So ordered lists are, I'm going to put it in my own words, ordered lists are very, very similar to unordered lists, with the exception that they basically get rendered differently on the actual HTML page. So what is the actual difference? Well, instead of using UL or unordered list, you just use OL or ordered list. Okay, so that's the only difference. The list elements are the same. They look the same inside of the nested section here, but instead of using the UL, we actually say OL. Okay, so the challenge here is create an ordered list of the top 3 things that cats hate the most. So we're gonna indent here. So we're gonna make an ordered list. So much like the last lesson, we'll say OL, we'll open that ordered list tag, and personal preference here, I like to come and just close that tag immediately. So our opening tag and then our closing tag. Now inside of that, we need to put 3 things that cats hate the most. So I'll make a new list element, and I'll say, well, they don't hate water because they hate baths, right? So baths, you can see what's the difference here. Well, these were bullet point style. This one is numbered, and it actually picked a default 1 for us. So it's automatically numbering as many elements as we put in there. So to prove that, we'll say list element dogs, right? So 1 and then 2. So I haven't set those numbers here, right? I haven't said like 1 baths, 2 dogs. In this case, it's automatically picking it because it's saying this is an ordered or numbered list. So it'll just list it out that way. I'm trying to think of something. I don't know. I honestly can't think of anything else. I don't have a cat, so that's the only 2 things I can think of. I'll put something else here, right? So baths, dogs, something else. Let's just say like everything. All the cats I've known have been really grumpy. So baths, dogs, and everything. These are getting numbered automatically, right? So it's inside of an ordered list. So baths is number 1, dogs is number 2, everything is number 3. And just to prove with it, this is really based on that ordered list tag, let's change this to an unordered list. This isn't what the challenge asks for, but let's just explore a little bit, right? So catnip, laser pointers, lasagna, these are in a bullet point, unordered list. And now I've changed these top 3 things that cats hate as well to an unordered list. So you can see that it renders with that bullet point style. If we bring it back here by just undoing to ordered list, it then turns into a numbered ordered list where we have 1, 2, and 3. So we'll run the test here and we get another pass. Create a text field. So let's create a web form. Input elements are a convenient way to get input from your user. So you can create a text input like this. Input is the attribute with input is a tag with the type attribute set to text. Note that input elements are self-closing. So you remember with the image tag, I can actually show you here. This is a self-closing element. There's no, closing tag to match image. It just kind of ends right here. This input tag, which we're exploring in this lesson, is the same way. So the challenge here is create an input element of type text below your lists. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to indent, and I'm going to give it an input element with an attribute of type set to text. And then it's self-closing, so I'll just close that bracket right there, and that's all that I need to do. So you can see it shows up here at the bottom. I can actually click in here and I can type stuff, test 1, 2, 3. So you now have an input where you can accept input from a user, right? You can come in here and you can type stuff. You can delete it. You can paste stuff in there too, right? So this is an input element. Let's run the test and we get another pass. Add placeholder text to a text field. So placeholder text is what is displayed in your input element before your user has inputted anything. You can create placeholder text like so. We have this input here, has an attribute of type set to text, and then we have a placeholder attribute which says this is placeholder text. So we're going to guess here that this placeholder attribute is what allows you to set placeholders, right? So let's set the placeholder value of your text input to cat photo URL. Let me copy that. So we'll come down to our input here, and inside here, right? Importantly, not here, right? That's not what we want. We want to come inside of the tag, let's say space, placeholder, give it another attribute called placeholder, and give it the text inside of double quotes, cat photo URL. And I can see here, it kind of shows up here with this like de-emphasized gray text where it just says cat photo URL. If I click here, you can see it still shows up. But as soon as I put something in here, foo.com, you can see that that placeholder text goes away when the user puts in content. If I delete this, you can see that the placeholder shows back up. So let's run the tests and we get another pass. Create a form element. So you can build web forms that actually submit data to a server using nothing more than pure HTML. You can do this by specifying an action attribute on your form element. For example, now we have this block of code here where we have this form tag. So you can see the form opens here, has an input nested inside of it, and then closes underneath that. And then we have this attribute, which is called action. So this is a URL where you want to submit form data. Okay, so form is a new tag that has an action attached to it, which says where you want to submit form data. This is a URL, right? And then inside of that, we can nest our inputs. So nest the existing input element inside a form element and assign this URL to the action attribute of the form element. So let's come down here, we'll find our input right here. I'm gonna make a new line above it, and I'm gonna make my form. So open form tag, we're gonna give it this action attribute, and this is gonna be our URL right here, right? freecatphotoapp.com/submit catphoto. I'm gonna paste it inside of these double quotes, and then I'm going to close this opening tag. Now inside of here, I'm going to nest this. It actually already is nested, but I just like to give it 2 more spaces to indent it so it's a little bit easier to read. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this form tag. Okay, so form, it's been nested. This input tag has been nested inside of this form, and I've given it an action, which is where the URL or what URL we're going to submit the form data to. Okay, there actually isn't like a change here that you can see quite yet. We'll probably get to it, I would imagine, here in the next lesson. So let's just run the tests and we get a pass here. Add a submit button to a form. Let's add a submit button to your form. Clicking this button will send the data from your form to the URL you specified with your form's action attribute. Here's an example submit button. So we have a button element here. It has an attribute of type set to submit. And then inside of that, we have some text. This button submits the form, and then we close that button tag. So add a button as the last element of your form element with a type of submit, and submit as its text. Okay, so we're gonna come down to our form here, right? That's this entire section. And what we wanna do is add a button as the last element nested inside of our form element. So we've already nested this input here. Underneath that, we're gonna make a new line and we're gonna make a button. So button element, it's going to have an attribute type, which is set to submit. So type equals submit. And then I'm gonna give it some text. So I'm just gonna close that opening tag here and I'm gonna give it the text submit. And then I'm going to close that button tag, right? So button type submit. The text inside of that is submit, and then I close that button tag. And it's still nested inside of this form tag here, right? So our form now has an input, which is of type text, and it also has a button type of submit. So you can see it gives a button here. I'm not gonna click that yet because I would guess there's one more thing we have to do, but we'll see how it works here. Let's run the test and we get a pass. Okay, use HTML5 to require a field. You can require specific form fields so that your user will not be able to submit your form until he or she has filled them out. For example, if you want to make a text input field required, you can just add the attribute required within your input element, like this, input type text, and then this attribute here, required. Make your text input a required field so that your user can't submit the form without completing this field. Then try to submit the form without inputting any text. See how your HTML5 form notifies you that the field is required. Okay, so let's come back here to our input, which we made a couple lessons ago. And all we need to do is add a new attribute inside of this opening tag that is just required. So I'll pass required there. You can see it gets highlighted with special syntax highlighting. So what actually changed? Well, nothing looks different here, right? But if I click submit, you can see I get this little error here. Please fill out this field. As soon as I give it something, foo.com, and I click submit, you can see that it says, thank you, we'll review your submitted response and reply if needed. Okay, so we know that as soon as we fill in that value, we're then able to submit the form. Let's run the tests and we get another pass. Create a set of radio buttons. You can use radio buttons for questions where you want the user to give you only give you one answer out of multiple options. Radio buttons are a type of input. Each of your radio buttons can be nested within its own label element. By wrapping an input element inside of a label element, it'll automatically associate the radio button input with the label element surrounding it. All related radio buttons should have the same name attribute to create a radio button group. By creating a radio group, selecting any single radio button will automatically deselect the other buttons within the same group, ensuring only one answer is provided by the user. So here is an example of a radio button. So we have this label tag here, which we open with this opening label tag, and then we nest the input tag inside of it. So it has a type of radio, and it also has a name attribute, which is set to indoor, outdoor. Then we have this text here that just says indoor. That's going to be our label text. We also close this label tag here after that. So we have opening label. This is our input tag. And then we have some text that goes along with this input. And then we close the label. It is considered best practice to set a for attribute on the label element with a value that matches the value of the ID attribute of the input element. This allows assistive technologies to create a linked relationship between the label and the child input element. lot of words. For example, let's just actually look at the example because there's a lot going on there. So label is our, still our kind of parent attribute, right? So we're opening up this label element, and then we have this attribute for, which is set to indoor. Inside of that, we have this input, which is ID equals indoor. So basically, if we have a label here, we give it this attribute for. Inside of that, we give it an input with an ID set to indoor. So they match, right? Label for, input ID. This helps assistive technologies like screen readers and things like that for people who are impaired using, computing devices to say these two things are related to each other. Okay, so add a pair of radio buttons to your form, each nested in its own label element. One should have the option of indoor, and the other should have the option of outdoor. Both should share the name attribute of indoor-outdoor to create a radio group. Okay, so let's come down here, and in between my input and my button, right, I'm going to create a new line here, and that's going to make a new, tag or section in between this input and this button. So I'm going to first start by making my first radio button. So I'm going to make a label, and I'm going to say this one is for indoor, the indoor option, right? So I'm going to say label for, the for attribute set to indoor. I'm going to close that opening tag, and then inside of that, I'm going to put my radio button. So input ID equals indoor, right? You remember this for and this ID need to match. And then I'm going to give it a type of radio to say this is a radio button. And then finally, I'm going to give it a name, which is going to be indoor, outdoor. Okay, so ID is set to indoor, which matches this for label here. The type of the input is radio, and the name, which specifies kind of the radio button group that this is a part of, is indoor-outdoor. I'm going to close that input, and then I'm going to give it a label. I'm going to say space indoor. Okay, and then I'm going to close this label. So now I have this button here, indoor, which I can click. You can see when I click the text here, it also will select it. So now what I need to do is make my second input, or second radio button. That is, this one is going to be outdoor. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy paste it. So copy, new line, paste. Now I have two that are marked indoor, right? I need to select one of these. I'll make it the second one and make it outdoor. So we'll change indoor here to outdoor. Again, for the input ID to outdoor. Now the name here is going to stay the same, right? So if you remember, we come up here, the name attribute is for a radio button group. So when these are set to the same value, these two inputs, it says that these are part of the same group. So what I'm going to do here, I'll show you why that matters in a second. I'm going to say outdoor for the label. The reason why this matters is now if I click one of these, let's say I select outdoor, if I click indoor, it's going to actually jump between them. So what makes a radio button is you can only select one. And when you put them inside of a group like this, so they're inside of the same group, indoor, outdoor, what happens here is it means you can only select one of the two options. What would happen if I gave it a different option? So maybe pause the video and think about it. What would happen if I change this to, I don't know, cat? I should give it a random value. So think about it for a second before I show you. Okay, so what's going to happen is if I click indoor here, this is part of the indoor-outdoor group, right? The second one is part of a different group. And when I select it, you can see I can actually click both of them. So it's really important that this name here matches between these two. This really needs to be indoor-outdoor. So now you can see I can only select one of them because they're in the same group. So let's come down here, let's run our tests, and we get another pass. Create a set of checkboxes. Forms commonly use checkboxes for questions that have more than one answer. Checkboxes are a type of input. Okay, so we're learning a new type of input besides text and radio. We're now looking at checkboxes. Each of your checkboxes can be nested within its own label element. by wrapping an input element inside of a label element, it will automatically associate the checkbox input with the label element surrounding it. So this is just like the radio input, right? We have this label element inside of it. We're going to put this input and it says, hey, this label corresponds to this input. All related checkbox inputs should have the same name attribute. And it's also considered best practice to explicitly define the relationship between a checkbox input and its corresponding label by setting the for attribute on the label element to match the ID attribute of the associated input element. This is very, very similar to radio buttons, right? So label for is set to loving, input ID is set to loving, and then we give it this type of checkbox name, which is set to personality. And then we have this text here, which is for our label, and then we just close the label tag here. So add to your form a set of 3 checkboxes. Each checkbox should be nested within its own label element, and all 3 should share the name attribute of personality. So let's come down here and let's make our personality checkboxes, okay? So I'm gonna look here and you can see I have this label, input text type, and then button. So this is basically all the separate parts of our form. I'm going to make my personality checkboxes right here before the input type text, but after the input elements. So let's make a new label. I'm going to say label for, and personality. Let's just do this first one. So loving. I'm going to close that input tag, or close that label tag, and then I'm going to make a new tag here nested inside of that. Actually, first, why don't I close that label tag just so I can know for sure that I've done that. It's kind of good practice to get into. So label for set to loving, and then close the label tag. Now inside of that, let's make an input. This is going to have an ID of, this part for you to guess. What does the ID need to match here? Well, it needs to match the for. That's going to be loving. The type is going to be checkbox, and then the name is going to be personality. So just like with our radio buttons, the name here matches a larger group of elements. In this case, we're doing checkboxes for personality. So name here should be set to personality. Let's close that and let's make the actual label text, which is just loving here. Okay. Now I want to show you one thing they did here that I wasn't sure if they're going to talk about, but it's good that they did, which is the BR or break tag. So what this does is essentially forces a new line on your HTML screen. You can see that there's this indoor, outdoor, and then this break tag, okay? So if I paste this in there, you can see it actually forces, I'll show you one more time, I'll undo that, paste it again. You can see it forces the cat photo URL to be on a new line, which is really useful. So I'm just gonna actually put this down here. I'm just gonna hang on to it, and it's just gonna make it a little bit easier to read this form, right? So now what I'm going to do is add 2 more personalities, right? And once again, I'm going to encourage you to use copy and paste. I think realistically, everyone uses copy and paste when they're coding, but it's important, and it's an important skill to kind of develop where you really need to look at what you're copy pasting and making sure that you update things accordingly. So let's paste that in. We have a loving. We need to give it a different personality type here, right? So I'll say grumpy. And I'll type it really horribly, fix it to grumpy. So grumpy for ID is grumpy, still has a type of checkbox, still has a name of personality, right? Because they're part of the same personality checkbox group. This just becomes grumpy as a label. And now you can see I have loving and grumpy. I'll add one more here, and I'll make this, let's say playful. So for playful ID is playful, type and name stay the same, but this label becomes playful. So we now have 3 input type checkboxes, loving, which we can click, grumpy, playful, we can select all of these, or as many or as little of them as we want. And the difference between a checkbox element, which I can select, let's say all 3 of these, and the radio element is I can only select one, right, with a radio element. So indoor or outdoor versus checkbox, which is loving and grumpy and playful, right? So they're very different ways of thinking about data. Radio buttons, one or the other. Checkboxes, as many or as little of them as you want. Let's run the tests, and we get another pass. Use the value attribute with radio buttons and checkboxes. When a form gets submitted, the data is sent to the server and includes entries for the options selected. Inputs of type radio and checkbox report their values from the value attribute. For example, so we have this label here, for set to indoor. Again, input of ID set to indoor. And now we have this value, which is an attribute set to indoor. Type is still the same, it's radio. Name is still the same, indoor, outdoor, as the previous lessons that is. And then we have this label here set to indoor. Okay, we have another label here called outdoor, input ID set to outdoor, and we have the value also set to outdoor. So importantly, we're looking at this value attribute. And the idea here is that when a form gets submitted, the data is sent to the server, and that inputs of type radio and checkbox report their values from the value attribute. So here you have two radio inputs. When the user submits the form with the indoor option selected, the form data will include the line indoor outdoor equals indoor. This is from the name and value attributes of the indoor input. So let's break that down. So indoor dash outdoor equals indoor. Where does that come from? So if we select over here, let's say indoor, right? So we have this first input type radio, which we've selected, and it's getting sent, or it's sending data to the server of name equals value. So name here is indoor outdoor, right? That's shared between these two. So it can be either this one or this one with a type of radio. So indoor outdoor equals the value of indoor, or if I select outdoor, outdoor, right? So if you omit the value attribute, the submitted form data uses the default value, which is on. Okay, so if I select this, indoor on, outdoor on. In this scenario, if the user clicked the indoor option and submitted the form, the resulting form data would be indoor outdoor equals on, which is not useful. Agreed. So the value attribute needs to be set to something to identify the option. Give each of the radio and checkbox inputs the value attribute. Use the input label text in lowercase as the value for that attribute. Okay, so we'll come down here and we need to update every single one of these inputs. And what we need to do is give it the value, right? So it says use the input label text in lowercase as the value for the attribute. So let's come into our first input here. This is the input tag. And at the end here, let's say value equals. Now, what would the value here be? I'll give you a second to think about it. Again, keep in mind that the value is what's going to be submitted here when we select this, right? So if this is our indoor checkbox or radio, it's not a checkbox. If this is our indoor radio, we select this, what would be the value that we'd want sent to the server? It would be indoor. Same thing here in the second one. This is our outdoor input. I'm just going to set this to outdoor. Okay, now we move on to our checkboxes. So input ID loving, type checkbox, name personality. So our value here is loving. Next input. So this is our input here. Our value would be lazy. And for our final one, our last input is checkbox personality for energetic. So our value here is energetic. Okay. And so now what we've done is we've said, instead of setting whatever the default value is, in this, like for radio buttons, it would be on. And I think for checkboxes as well, it would be on for all of them, which is not helpful. Instead, we're saying, indoor would be the indoor outdoor radio. And then for personality, we would pass loving and lazy and energetic. So we're passing these specific values for the form. Let's run the tests and we get another pass and we're 86% there. We're on the home stretch. Check radio buttons and checkboxes by default. So you can set a checkbox or radio button to be checked by default using the checked attribute. To do this, just add the word checked to the inside of an input element, for example. So input type radio, name, test name, and then we just pass in this checked attribute. So if you did the required lesson earlier where it showed you how to require an input, this is really similar. So set the first of your radio buttons and the first of your checkboxes to both be checked by default. Okay, so let's scroll down here. Let's find our first radio button. So these are our two radio buttons right here, right? So let's find the first input here, and we'll just pass in checked, okay? And you'll notice when it refreshes here that this has automatically been selected. So it's already said the first value here is checked. We could test that by just deleting this and pasting it in this other one, right? And now you can see outdoor is checked by default. Let's move it back to what they're looking for in the test though. So that's our radio buttons, okay? Now our checkboxes, which are these three, loving, lazy, and energetic. So let's find the input here, and inside the very end here of that tag, we'll just say checked. And now you can see that loving is also checked by default. And with this one, because a checkbox can have multiple values, we could also copy this and put it, in lazy as well, right? We can see that loving and lazy are both checked. So you can set default checked values here for each of these inputs. So I'll undo that. Let's run the tests and we get another pass. Okay, nest many elements within a single div element. So the div element, also known as a division element, is a general purpose container for other elements. The div element is probably the most commonly used HTML element of all. That's true. Agreed. It is the most common HTML tag that you will learn. It's really important to understand. Just like with any other non-self-closing element, you can open a div with this opening div tag and close it on another line with this closing div tag. So nest your things cats love and top 3 things cats hate lists all within a single div element. So we're going to look at our list, right? So things cats love. We also have our unordered list, and then top 3 things that cats hate, and our ordered list. We want to nest all of that within a div element. So we'll put a new line here. Let's indent and let's start our div element. So div, we're going to put it, we're going to open the tag here and say this is the beginning of our div element. And now what we want to do is we want to nest both of these lists inside of this div element. So think about what line specifically. I'll scroll down here and the options are 8 through 30. Where would you put this closing div tag in order to nest these two lists as well as their text, right? Things cats love and top 3 things cats hate inside of this div element. I'll give you a sec to think about it. Okay, so we know that top 3 things cats hate and ordered list, we know that this is the second list, right? This is our bottom part of what we want to nest inside of this div element. And so what we want to do is close that div element on line 20. We want to say that everything from here to here, which is, things cats love, unordered list, top 3 things cats hate, ordered list, that all gets indented inside of the div. So I'll highlight all of this code and I'll press tab, and you can see that it'll indent this inside of the div. And now I have nested that inside of my div element. So let's run the tests and we get another pass. Okay, declare the doc type of an HTML document. The challenges so far have covered specific HTML elements and their uses. However, there are a few elements that give overall structure to your page and should be included in every HTML document. At the top of your document, you need to tell the browser which version of HTML your page is using. HTML is an evolving language and is updated regularly. Most major browsers support the latest specification, which is HTML5. However, older web pages may use previous versions of the language. You tell the browser this information by adding the doctype. So it's just open bracket, exclamation point, doctype, tag on the first line, where the ... part is the version of HTML. For HTML5, you use doctype lowercase HTML. The exclamation point and uppercase doctype is important, especially for older browsers. The HTML is not case sensitive. So what they mean by that is you always need to start your doctype with exclamation point and then in all caps, very importantly, in all caps, doctype. Right? After that, we say this is HTML. This corresponds to HTML5. So we're saying doctype HTML. Okay, so next, the rest of your HTML code needs to be wrapped in HTML tags. the opening HTML goes directly below Doctype, and the closing HTML goes at the end of the page. So here's an example of page structure. Your HTML code would go in the space between the two HTML tags. So we start with our Doctype of HTML, and then we open this HTML tag and close it at the bottom. Add a Doctype tag for HTML5 to the top of the blank HTML document in the code editor. Under it, add opening and closing HTML tags which wrap around an H1 element. The heading can include any text. So I think this is the first time we've started with like a totally blank editor, which should be fun. Let's start with our HTML Doctype. So I'm going to open this tag, and I'm going to say, and it has to exactly match this, exclamation point Doctype, no spaces, all uppercase letters, exclamation point Doctype, space, HTML. Okay, so I'm saying this is a Doctype of HTML5, which says this HTML page is written in HTML5. Now underneath that, I'm going to start my HTML page, and to do that, I'm going to write an HTML tag. I'm going to make a new line, and then I'm actually just going to leave a blank space there, and then I'm going to close that tag with the closing HTML tag. Now everything inside of my HTML page will be nested inside of this HTML tag. You remember we've been nesting HTML elements inside of different HTML elements. This is kind of like the mega like parent HTML element. Everything goes inside of this, okay? And the last thing we want to do here is add an H1 element, which is our header level 1 element. This heading can include any text. So I'll just say H1, hi, I'm Christian, and then close that H1 tag. Okay, so our doc type is set to HTML5. We set up an HTML tag and nest our H1, hi, I'm Christian, inside of it. So we'll run the tests and we get another pass. Define the head and body of an HTML document. So you can add another level of organization in your HTML document within the HTML tags with the head and body elements. Any markup with information about your page would go into the head tag. Then any markup with the content of the page, that is what displays for a user, would go into the body tag. Metadata elements such as link, meta, title, and style typically go inside the head element. Okay, so here's an example of a page's layout. So this is a lot like the last lesson, right? Our doc type is set here to HTML5. Then we have this HTML tag, which everything gets nested inside of. Now inside of that, we have two new tags. So head, which is the where we put like metadata and titles and things like that. We'll look at that here in a sec. We have this meta example here. So head and body. And body has our div element here. So this is what actually gets displayed for the user, okay? So edit the markup so there's a head and a body. The head element should only include the title, and the body element should only include the H1 and paragraph tag. So we look at our code here, we have our doc type, we have an HTML element, and then inside of that we have title, and then we have H1, and then we have paragraph. And then down here at the very bottom, we have our HTML. So we're going to be introducing two new tags here, and we're going to be nesting this existing content inside of those two new elements. So let's start by just making those. So I'm going to say head, I'm going to make a new line, and I'm going to close that head, right? So that's this one here, head, and I'm going to do the same for body. So body, and then close the body tag here and just re-indent it. Okay, so now what we've done is we've made head here and we've made body. Now we need to know which one goes inside of which. Well, it says here the head element should only include the title. Okay, so let's just do, I'll do a cut here, which is just Control X or Command X, depending on your computer, which is kind of like a copy and paste with delete, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna cut it. I'll come into my head and then I'll do paste and I'll let you paste. There we go. So I pasted this into, into my head section here, right? So I've said the title goes inside of head. Now all of this stuff, our H1 and our paragraph, must go in the body. The reason for that is that the body says what stuff should be displayed to the user. So once again, I'll cut that with Control X, and inside of here, I'll paste that in. And now I can see that my head here, that best page ever, is not displayed anywhere, right? So what is that? What is the title? So the title is actually this thing up here, the name of the web page, right? So learn basic HTML and HTML5. So that is the title for this page. And in the same way, the title for this page here would be the best page ever. If we were viewing this in a separate tab, we would see that that's that matching title. And the body here is just our H1 and our paragraph tag. So let's run the tests and we get another pass. And I think that we are 100% done with basic HTML and HTML5. Okay, so back in our responsive web design, this is now a completed basic HTML and HTML5, all 28 lessons done in a little over an hour, I think, if I looked at my recording time correctly. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful. Stay tuned. We'll go into the next section here, 44 lessons of basic CSS, where we cover things like coloring your text, font size, spacing, all of that kind of stuff. If you enjoyed this video, I want to call out in the description that I have a blog and a weekly newsletter where I cover all sorts of stuff about software development. And I will also link to a specific subscriber-only resource, totally available for free, but you do need to join the newsletter to get access to it, where I'll give you a couple extra study guide and question things to go along with my basic HTML and HTML5 code through of freeCodeCamp that I just did. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, turn on notifications, you'll know when the next video comes out, and leave a comment if you went through this with me, if you did the code through with me. I would love to hear about it. I hope this is useful, and I'll see you in the next video.